The first thing I saw when I came back to life was question 14, and my answer was still there. Not faint. Not half-erased. Not smudged into shame. There, in my own handwriting, blue ink slanting upward because my hand always got faster when I knew I was right. Source C is a retrospective forgery. It uses the 2011 Council seal on a document dated 1998, and it refers to the East Annex, which was not opened until 2004. Therefore, the source cannot be contemporary evidence. I stared at the sentence until the exam hall blurred around it. The paper smelled like toner and rain. My left wrist hurt from writing too fast. The clock above the invigilator's table read 10:52 a.m., 8 minutes before pens down. I was seated in the old debating hall of Fairborn Collegiate, desk 21, third row, under a portrait of a founder who looked like he had never been asked to prove anything in his life. Around me, students bent over their papers, shoulders tight, calculators absent, because this was not that kind of exam. This was the Veritas Scholarship Source Analysis Final. 3 hours, 20 questions, 1 brutal document packet, full tuition for year 12, a university history mentorship, and the kind of recommendation letter that could move a girl from a cracked rental apartment into rooms where people said potential without meaning if funded. In my first life, Mr. Edmund Vey, head of humanities, examination chair, and father of Fairborn's most polished student, leaned beside my desk after seeing that answer and whispered, "Erase question 14, Lena. You do not accuse an official document in a scholarship exam." I erased it. My score fell by 7 marks. His son, Theo Vey, won by 4. Later, when I was 28, I died in a records room fire after trusting an official safety file that had one altered inspection page inside it. My last thought, with smoke in my throat and archives burning around me, was, I should have left question 14 answered. Now I was 17 again. Question 14 was still answered. Mr. Vey was walking down the aisle with his fountain pen in his hand. And this time, I placed my palm flat beside the answer and did not move. People think exams are about knowledge. That is only partly true. Exams are also about obedience, to time, to format, to silence, to the authority of printed pages. A question arrives on school letterhead, so students assume it deserves answering on its own terms. A source is stamped, so students assume it deserves trust. A teacher walks past, so students lower their eyes. Question 14 was designed to punish that habit. At least, that was what I believed later. On the surface, it looked like a normal source evaluation item. The exam packet contained 6 documents about the old Harrow Quarantine Station, a coastal building the town council had converted into a conference center after decades of controversy. We had a newspaper article, a council minute, a protest flyer, a private letter, an inspection report, and Source C, a typed evacuation notice supposedly issued in 1998 during the final winter the station housed emergency families after the flood. The question asked, which source is least reliable as contemporary evidence, and what internal detail proves it? Most students would choose the protest flyer because it was emotional. Some would choose the newspaper because journalism can be biased. Theo Vey, in the first life and almost certainly in this one, chose the private letter because the leaked draft key told him to. But Source C was the trap. It looked official. It had a crest. It had a date. It had formal language. It was also impossible. The crest printed in the header did not exist until 2011, when the council merged with East Ward and changed its emblem. The East Annex referenced in the notice did not open until 2004. The document was not contemporary. It was created later, or at least altered later, to make the evacuation look orderly. Question 14 was not asking whether I could distrust a messy source. It was asking whether I could distrust a neat one. My name was Lena Marceau, and I was very good at noticing neat lies. That was not a gift. It was a survival skill. My mother worked in a tenancy advice office, where landlords sent polished emails about minor damp above photos of ceilings sagging with mold. My father drove delivery vans until his eyesight worsened, and he began taking night dispatch shifts instead, reading route codes under fluorescent lights that made everyone older. My grandmother, who lived with us and spoke mostly in proverbs sharpened by poverty, kept every receipt she had ever been given in biscuit tins labeled by year. Paper lies less when you keep its cousins, she told me. When I was little, I thought that was funny. By 17, I understood it was legal advice disguised as folklore. At Fairborn Collegiate, students like Theo Vey quoted historians. I checked dates, seals, footnotes, building names, formatting changes, and whether a document sounded too clean for the year it claimed to belong to. Fairborn praised me for being meticulous, which was how rich schools compliment poor girls for mistrust when that mistrust improves marks. The Veritas scholarship was supposed to be perfect for me. The exam did not reward memorizing dates. It rewarded reading documents against each other. Students received a packet of sources and had to analyze reliability, motive, chronology, omission, and contradiction. The scholarship carried not only full tuition but access to the Fairborn Archive internship, a summer place at the university's Public History Center, and publication of the winning response in the school journal. My mother said, "Full tuition?" the same way she said it about every opportunity that might stop our life from tipping. My father said, "You'll win if they ask you to catch liars." My grandmother said, "Only if the liars are not marking." We laughed. She did not. Mr. Edmund Vey was the kind of teacher who made old families feel cultured. Tall, silver-haired, always in a dark suit, with a fountain pen clipped inside his jacket pocket and a voice like polished wood. He taught history as if civilization were a dinner table to which only certain people had proper invitations. He could make a sentence about civic duty sound like a blessing and a warning at once. He chaired the Veritas Scholarship Committee, edited the school journal, supervised debate, and had the principal's ear because donors loved him. His son, Theo, inherited the performance without the patience. Theo had beautiful handwriting, perfect posture, and the ability to make a half-understood idea sound like a moral stance. Teachers adored his confidence. Students called him brilliant because he never seemed surprised by a question. But that was because most questions had been shown to him in some form before.
He was not stupid.
He was worse than stupid, capable enough to believe the help he received was merely the world recognizing his natural standard. In my first life, I began the exam calm. That seems impossible now, but it is true. The packet opened cleanly. Question 1 asked about authorial purpose. Question 4 asked us to compare tone across the newspaper and protest flyer. Question 8 required placing 3 documents in chronological order despite 2 missing dates. I moved steadily. Question 11 asked why an inspection report might understate risk if written for a funding committee. I almost smiled. Then question 14 appeared, and the whole exam sharpened. I saw the seal first. Wrong crest. The document said 1998, but the crest showed the merged council emblem adopted long after. Then East Annex wrong building. I checked the source list twice, then the timeline on page 3. East Annex opened in 2004. I wrote my answer carefully because accusing an official document felt dangerous, even on paper. Source C is a retrospective forgery. The word forgery made my hand pause. Too strong?
Maybe.
But the question asked what internal detail proved unreliability. If a document dated itself before the existence of its own seal and building reference, unreliable was too gentle. I wrote the truth. Mr. Vey saw it during the final check. He was not supposed to read answers. Invigilators could move through rows, ensure students had no unauthorized materials, answer procedural questions, and watch for distress. They were not there to examine content. But Mr. Vey had a way of looking at papers without seeming to lower his gaze. In my first life, as he passed desk 21, his pen paused above his attendance sheet. His eyes caught question 14.
He stopped.
Not suddenly. That would have warned others. He rested one hand on the desk, leaned as if checking my candidate number, and whispered, "That answer is unwise." I looked up, confused. "Sir?" "Erase question 14.
Why?
You do not accuse an official document in a scholarship exam. But the seal is wrong." His smile remained, very small, very cold. "You are overreaching." The East Annex, Lena. One word. Soft enough for only me. Heavy enough to press air from my lungs. There are 7 marks here. A reckless accusation can cost more than a blink. I should have argued. Instead, fear began doing arithmetic. My bursary renewal. My mother's tenancy office contract with the school outreach board. My father's application for extra dispatch shifts through a donor's logistics company. My grandmother's medication subsidy letter, which the school welfare office had helped us file. Mr. Vey did not list them immediately.
He did not need to.
Then, when I hesitated, he said, "Fairborn has been generous to your family. Do not repay trust with theatrical suspicion." His pen hovered over my page like a black needle. Erase it. So I erased. That is the part that still burns. Not because erasing changed 1 mark, but because the act was physical. I rubbed the blue ink with correction tape until the sentence became a white scar. I rewrote nothing. Question 14 sat blank under a strip of false cleanliness. When results came back, the blank cost 7 marks. My total fell below Theo's. During feedback, Professor Imani Wells, the external judge, said, "Your paper was extremely strong, but the missing response to question 14 weakened your reliability profile." Reliability profile. I remember nodding as if the missing answer were my failure of courage rather than someone else's hand pressing down invisibly.
Theo won.
In his published response, he wrote that source D, the private letter, was least reliable because personal grief can distort civic memory. It was elegant, sympathetic, and wrong. The published answer key quietly accepted multiple responses because the committee recognized valid interpretive variation. That phrase hid everything. My answer had been the only one that named the altered official document. Without it, the exam could stay polite. The first life, after that, bent toward paper anyway. I lost the Veritas scholarship, stayed at Fairborn only by taking a smaller bursary and working in the school library during lunch. My mother's office lost the outreach contract the following term.
My father did not get the dispatch shifts.
My grandmother said nothing, but when I helped her sort receipts, she touched the correction tape scar on my feedback copy and muttered, "White lies leave white marks." Theo Vey went on to win history prizes, study law, and write articles about public memory. Mr. Vey became deputy principal, then retired into consultancy on ethical heritage education. I became a records assistant at the municipal archive because apparently the universe has a sense of humor and a taste for unfinished business. I learned to handle fragile documents, track version histories, compare seals, identify altered minutes, and file freedom of information requests sharp enough to make departments suddenly find missing attachments. The fire happened in the archive basement under the old civic building. It was electrical, though later reports used phrases like complex contributing factors because direct language makes liability nervous. We had been digitizing emergency housing files from the 1990s, including records from the Harrow quarantine station. Yes, that one. Source C had never left me. When the boxes arrived, I found evacuation notices, council memos, inspection photographs, and 3 versions of the public summary. One folder was missing an internal warning page. Another contained a notice with a crest pasted over the original letterhead. My hands went cold. I stayed late to scan the sequence before the records were moved again. At 9:13 p.m., the lights flickered. At 9:17, smoke entered through the vent. At 9:20, the fire alarm finally sounded. I carried one box toward the stairs and tripped when the emergency lights failed. Papers slid across concrete. The air turned black. I remember coughing so hard my ribs felt like snapped pencils. I remember seeing one page near my hand, an evacuation notice with the wrong seal. I laughed, because apparently my life had become a footnote to question 14. My last thought was not noble. It was furious. "Leave it," answered. Then the exam hall returned and my blue ink sentence was still alive. In the second life, I did not wait for Mr. Vey to notice before protecting the answer. At 10:49, 3 minutes before he reached my row, I raised my hand. A junior invigilator, Ms. Chun, came over. "Yes, candidate 21? May I request an answer legibility note for question 14? She blinked. "Is there a printing issue?"
No.
I want to confirm that my answer should remain as written and not be altered after final time. It was an odd request. I knew that. But odd is better than erased. Ms. Chen glanced toward the front table. Candidates may edit their own answers until time is called. I understand. I am not asking to edit. I am asking that the current answer be marked as final if any issue is raised. She frowned, then saw something in my face that made her straighten. Honest adults often recognize fear before they understand its cause. I can note that candidate 21 requested no alteration to question 14 after 10:49. Thank you. She wrote it on her invigilator sheet. Small handwriting. Huge consequence. Mr. Vey was still 3 rows away. I placed my pen down beside the answer and folded my hands.
Passive non-intervention.
I left question 14 answered. When Mr. Vey arrived, the air changed exactly as before. His pen paused. His eyes dropped. He read the sentence. I watched the moment his confidence met the wrong seal, the East Annex, the word forgery, and my refusal to be blank. His expression remained almost perfect, but his fingers tightened around the fountain pen. Candidate 21, he said softly, you may wish to reconsider question 14. I looked up. No, thank you. The answer startled him more than an argument would have. It is overreaching. It is my final answer. You still have time to correct it. I requested a note that I am not altering it. His eyes flicked to Ms. Chen. She stood near the side aisle, watching now.
Good.
Witnesses are not magic, but they make private pressure heavier to lift. Mr. Vey lowered his voice. Lena, do not be theatrical. I am seated silently. You are accusing an official document of forgery. The question asks for the least reliable source. Say it is unreliable, not forged. The seal and building reference make it impossible as a contemporary source. Erase that word.
No.
There it was again.
No.
The second life is built from small words said on time. His face cooled. Your family's relationship with Fairborn has always depended on mutual trust. Question 14 does not belong to my family. Your mother's office benefits from school partnerships. Question 14 still does not belong to my family. Your father's employment references. Mr. Vey, Ms. Chen said, closer now. Is there a procedural issue with the candidate's paper? He straightened. The mask returned. Only advising clarity. Advice during writing time should be requested by the candidate. Ms. Chen's voice was polite, but not soft. I could have hugged her. Candidate 21, do you request advice? No, then please continue or wait quietly. Mr. Vey's fountain pen shifted in his hand. For 1 second, I imagined it dropping then. It did not. He still thought he could recover the room later. He moved on. At 11 o'clock, pens down. I did not touch the answer again. Ms. Chun collected my script herself, perhaps by chance, perhaps not. As she lifted it, she glanced at question 14, then at her note sheet, then placed my booklet in the candidate envelope. Collected as written, she murmured. 3 words.
I nearly cried.
In my first life, question 14 disappeared under correction tape. In this one, it entered the envelope in blue ink with an invigilator note attached like a bodyguard. The trouble began during marking, but I did not know that until later. What I experienced first was delay. Results were supposed to be announced Wednesday morning. Wednesday became Friday. Friday became pending external validation of one source analysis item. Students groaned because delays are annoying when you do not know they are evidence trying to survive. Theo Vey kept smiling in hallways, but less easily. Mr. Vey did not teach our class that week. Ms. Chen was seen entering the principal's office twice. My mother asked, "What did you do?" Answered a question. Lena. Left it answered. My grandmother looked up from peeling apples.
Good.
Answers are like doors. Some people hate open ones. My father said, "Was it the kind of question that gets a man fired?" I said, "Maybe." He nodded. Then eat first. On Friday afternoon, all Veritas finalists were called to the archive classroom rather than the assembly hall. That alone told me the school wanted fewer witnesses. Too late. Students had already sensed blood under the polished floorboards. The archive classroom was narrow, lined with glass cabinets of old registers, medals, maps, and donor plaques. At the front table sat Professor Imani Wells, external judge, Principal Harrow, Mr. Vey, Miss Chun, and a woman I did not recognize from the Fairborn board. Mr. Vey held his fountain pen.
Of course he did.
He always held it during results, like a scepter disguised as stationery. Theo sat across the room from me, jaw tight. His mother was not present. Mine was, because after the first life I had learned to include her in every official email, and she had developed the ability to arrive at school meetings with terrifying speed. Professor Wells spoke first. She was a small woman with cropped gray hair, bronze glasses, and the calm expression of someone who had spent a career watching institutions try to make dishonesty sound nuanced. "Thank you for attending," she said. "The Veritas marking panel has paused final scoring to review question 14.
A stir.
Mr. Vey looked at his notes. His pen moved once, making a small black mark in the margin. Professor Wells continued. Question 14 asked candidates to identify the least reliable contemporary source in the packet. The intended correct response was source C, based on two internal anachronisms, the Council Seal and the East Annex reference. My chest filled with heat. Intended correct response. Not overreach. Not theatrical suspicion.
Correct.
Professor Wells glanced at me briefly, then at the room. Only one candidate provided that response fully and explicitly. Theo's face changed. Mr. Vey's pen stopped moving. Principal Harrow shifted uncomfortably. We are also reviewing how a prior draft answer key appears to have circulated. There it was. The draft answer key. The thing my first life had never exposed because my answer disappeared. Professor Wells placed 2 pages on the table, one official final marking guide and one draft. The draft key lists source D as the expected response. The final version, amended after external review, identifies source C. Several candidate answers closely follow the obsolete draft language. Theo stared at the table. Mr. Vey's hand tightened around the fountain pen. Professor Wells turned a page. Candidate Theo Vey's response reproduces the draft phrasing almost exactly, including the phrase, "Personal grief can distort civic memory." That phrase. I remembered it from his published first life response. Hearing it read aloud in a room with adults made it sound suddenly less elegant and more like a fingerprint. Mr. Vey stood halfway. Professor Wells, we must be cautious before implying misconduct. Students often use similar vocabulary when trained in source evaluation. Indeed, she said. That is why we reviewed phrasing patterns across scripts. Theo is an exceptionally prepared student. Prepared from what materials? The question landed flat and hard. He lowered himself back into the chair. His pen remained poised above his notes, but his hand had begun to tremble. Not much.
Enough.
Professor Wells continued. We also have an invigilator note indicating candidate 21 requested preservation of her question 14 answer after Mr. Vey advised reconsideration during writing time. The room turned toward me. My mother's hand found my knee under the table. Mr. Vey's face remained composed, but his pen trembled more visibly now. That is a mischaracterization, he said. I advised a student against defamatory language. Ms. Chin spoke for the first time. The candidate did not request advice. Quiet sentence. Clean blade. Professor Wells looked at Mr. Vey. Did you instruct candidate 21 to erase or soften her answer to question 14? No, the word came too fast. Ms. Chen's eyes flicked up. I said, before fear could stop me, he told me to erase the word forgery and said my family's relationship with Fairborn depended on trust. My mother inhaled sharply, but did not interrupt. Mr. Vey turned to me with disappointment arranged across his face. Lena, that is not a fair account. It is accurate. You are a gifted student, but you sometimes mistake suspicion for insight. Professor Wells leaned forward. In this case, her suspicion was the intended insight. Silence. Perfect, devastating silence. Mr. Vey looked at Professor Wells, then at the 2 answer keys, then at Theo, whose face had gone pale. The fountain pen slipped from his fingers. It struck the table, rolled once, dropped over the edge, and hit the wooden floor with a sharp crack that sounded louder than applause. His face fell after it. Not all at once. First the mouth, then the eyes, then the posture, as if the pen had pulled his authority down with it. Everyone heard it. Everyone saw. No one moved to pick it up. That is the detail I remember most. The pen lay beside his polished shoe, black and silver, uncapped, a small line of ink bleeding into the floorboard groove. Mr. Vey stared at it as if it had betrayed him. Theo stared at his father. Professor Wells did not look at the pen. She looked at the record. "The review will proceed formally," she said. "For now, Candidate 21's answer to question 14 stands as correct. Candidate scores will be recalculated against the final key only. Any candidate response matching obsolete draft materials will be referred for integrity review." Principal Harrow looked as if he might dissolve into policy language. My mother's grip on my knee tightened. I breathed for the first time in what felt like 10 minutes. The room emptied in controlled pieces. Finalists were dismissed, families asked to remain available, staff told not to discuss the review, which meant everyone discussed it within 6 minutes. By the time I reached the courtyard, his pen dropped had already become the phrase moving through Fairborn like sparks along a fuse. Students who did not understand source analysis understood a pen falling from Mr. Vey's hand. Symbols do half the work adults think they control. Theo walked past me without speaking, face rigid. Mr. Vey remained in the archive classroom. Through the glass, I saw him finally bend to pick up the pen. He wiped the nib with a tissue, but the ink marks stayed on the floor. My mother did not speak until we reached the bus stop. Rain had started again, thin and silver. "He brought up my office?" "Yes." "Your father's references?" "Yes." "Your grandmother's assistants?" "Not this time." "First life." I stopped. Almost. She looked at me strangely. I swallowed. "He has before." My mother nodded slowly, storing the sentence for later. "She did that with dangerous facts." "And you left the answer?" "Yes." "Good." Then her voice broke. "Good." She hugged me under the bus shelter, so hard my ribs hurt. My grandmother, when we got home, listened to the whole story while sorting receipts from 2009 because apparently crisis did not interrupt her filing system. When I finished, she tapped the table. Official paper with wrong seal. Teacher with dropped pen. Same disease. My father asked if the pen was expensive. I said probably. He said, "Good. Let the floor keep some ink." The formal review took 2 weeks. During that time, Fairborn became a school of whispers. Question 14 appeared on bathroom mirrors in steam, on sticky notes inside lockers, in jokes during lunch. Someone drew a cartoon fountain pen falling off a desk with little motion lines. Teachers confiscated 3 versions and pretended not to laugh at one. Mr. Vey was placed on leave from examination duties. Theo did not attend classes for 4 days, then returned quieter, stripped of the effortless shine that had made people mistake him for untouchable. Some students mocked him. Others defended him as if his embarrassment were the true injustice. I tried not to feed on either. Theo had used something he should not have had. But Mr. Vey had built the access, held the pen, made the threat. The father was the architect. The son was the occupant who never asked who poured the foundation. The review findings were both precise and carefully restrained, which is how institutions confess while keeping lawyers calm. A draft answer key had been stored in a shared committee folder accessible to Mr. Vey after external review changed question 14. Theo's preparation notes contained language matching the obsolete draft. Mr. Vey had failed to disclose private coaching sessions after the final key was amended. He had approached candidate 21 during writing time about a substantive answer without being asked. He had referenced family-related school relationships in a manner inconsistent with assessment integrity. The panel could not prove Theo knowingly used leak materials, only that his preparation had been contaminated. That phrase, contaminated preparation, would have made my grandmother spit if she were the spitting type. Theo was removed from prize consideration but allowed to resit a different source analysis paper later. Mr. Vey resigned as Veritas chair and later from Fairborn entirely, officially, to spend time on independent curriculum writing. Of course. Men who drop pens always find new stationery. The scholarship results were announced in a smaller ceremony than planned, but everyone came anyway because scandal is the one extracurricular activity schools never need to fund. Professor Wells stood at the podium in the main hall. The portrait above her looked offended by reality. The Veritas Scholarship recognizes disciplined reading, chronological accuracy, and the courage to test official claims against evidence, she said. I loved her for adding courage, though I knew she meant it academically. This year's Veritas scholar is Lena Marceau. My mother cried. My father covered his face. My grandmother, who had insisted on attending despite saying ceremonies were where rich people clap for paperwork, stood up before anyone else and shouted, "Leave answers answered." The hall laughed, then applauded harder. I walked to the stage feeling as if the floor might tilt. Professor Wells handed me the certificate and, folded beneath it, a copy of my marked question 14 with a red tick beside the sentence Mr. Vey told me to erase. 7 out of 7. Under the comment, she had written, "Excellent identification of internal anachronism. Do not soften valid evidence." I kept that paper longer than the certificate. Theo found me in the archive room near the end of term. I was helping Ms. Chun file old exam packets because apparently trauma often becomes volunteering if you give me enough shelves. He stood in the doorway holding a notebook, no polished smile, no fountain pen father behind him. I didn't know the key was obsolete, he said.
No hello.
No apology yet. Did you know you had a key? I asked. He looked down. Dad called it a practice guide. With exact phrasing? I didn't ask. Why not? His face tightened. Because I liked having it. Honest.
Ugly.
Useful. He stepped inside. When Professor Wells asked about Source C, I didn't even check the seal. I had already decided the answer. That's not source analysis. I know. He swallowed. I was angry at you when everything happened. I thought you were trying to make me look bad. I answered question 14. I know. He rubbed the edge of his notebook. That's the worst part. You didn't do anything to me. I said nothing. Sometimes silence lets a person hear themselves properly. I'm sorry, he said. Not enough. But I am. I looked at him for a long moment. Next time, read the source before the guide. He gave a small, miserable laugh. Professor Wells said the same thing. She's right. We did not become friends. But when he resat the paper months later, he identified an altered council minute by comparing the meeting date to the membership list. He scored well. Not first. Honestly, that counts for something. The scholarship changed my life practically before it changed me emotionally. Tuition cleared. My mother's office lost the school partnership anyway, but by then Professor Wells had connected her with a better-funded legal aid program that did not use student obedience as collateral. My father got dispatch work through a company with no fair-born donors attached. My grandmother's medication subsidy remained because my mother filed it directly and copied 3 agencies, which made even bureaucracy behave. I joined the University Public History Center that summer and spent 6 weeks learning that archives are less about old paper than old power. Documents have costumes, seals, signatures, letterheads, stamps, minutes, summaries. Some costumes are earned. Some are stolen. My job, I learned, was not to distrust everything. It was to respect evidence enough to test it. Years later, I became an archival integrity investigator. That sounds niche because it is. I examine altered public records, heritage files, board minutes, safety reports, land use documents, school histories, and any official paper that smells too clean for the mess it claims to describe. I learned to compare seals, fonts, metadata, document codes, meeting attendance, building names, and the tiny anachronisms people miss when they think authority is a substitute for chronology. My grandmother lived long enough to see my first published report, which exposed a council housing file altered after a flooding complaint. She read the executive summary, sniffed, and said, "Too many passive verbs." She was right. I revised it. The archive fire from my first life did not happen the same way in the second. Because I knew to fear the Harrow files, I requested the evacuation records earlier through the Public History Center. Source C appeared again, but this time it had nowhere to hide. The wrong seal led to a chain of altered documents, which led to a safety review, which led to the archive basement's electrical fault being discovered before the records transfer. The building closed for repairs. Historians complained. Researchers complained. Council staff complained. Good. Complaints are what survival sounds like when disaster is prevented early enough to be inconvenient instead of tragic. On the night I had died in the first life, I was at home with my mother and grandmother, sorting digitized evacuation notices on the kitchen table. At 9:20 p.m., I checked the time and began shaking so hard my tea spilled over a photocopy. My grandmother looked at me, then at the paper. "The dead are allowed tonight?" she asked. I nodded because somehow she always knew. She patted the table. "Then answer them." I saw Mr. Vey years later at a heritage education conference. Of course, he had rebranded. Men like him rarely disappear. They rename the room. He now advised schools on responsible historical interpretation. He approached me after my panel on forged civic records, older, thinner, still carrying a fountain pen clipped inside his jacket like a restored crown. "Lena Marceau," he said, "you have made quite a career out of suspicion." "Out of evidence," I said. "Suspicion is where evidence starts." His smile cooled. "You always were inclined toward accusation." Question 14 was correct. The pen in his pocket shifted as he breathed. I noticed because I notice pens now. Theo suffered greatly after that year. Theo learned to read documents instead of answer keys. "You are still unforgiving." "No," I said. "I still remember the seal." His jaw tightened. A single exam answer can be a very small foundation for a life. It held. For a moment, his hand moved toward the fountain pen, perhaps from habit, perhaps to anchor himself. He did not take it out. Good. Some objects learn fear too. My mother eventually opened a tiny document help shop beside the tenancy office. She called it Question 14 because our family had apparently agreed subtlety was for people with fewer enemies. The shop helped residents scan leases, compare notices, write repair requests, file complaints, and identify suspicious changes in official letters. My grandmother sat there twice a week in a chair by the window, sorting receipts and telling anyone who would listen, "Check the date, check the stamp, check what building did not exist yet." My father built shelves for the place and labeled one drawer wrong seals as a joke. It filled faster than expected. On the wall above the copier, my mother hung a sign, "Do not erase the part that makes them nervous." Students came in before exams with practice papers. Tenants came in with notices. Workers came in with rosters changed after disputes. Everyone, it turned out, had a Question 14 somewhere. Now, when I teach source analysis, I tell students the most dangerous document is not the emotional one. It is the official one that wants to end the conversation. The typed notice. The stamped summary. The polished report. The minutes with no disagreement recorded. The safety file with one page too clean. Do not distrust it because you are cynical. Test it because truth deserves the respect of verification. Check the date against the seal. Check the building against the timeline. Check whether the person signing held the role that year. Check whether the language belongs to the period. Check whether a later institution has dressed an old mistake in newer clothes. And if your answer makes an authority figure hover over your desk, ask why. The simple version is true. I was reborn. I left Question 14 answered. He told me to erase it. His pen dropped. But the simple version cannot hold the correction tape scar from my first life. Miss Chen writing her small note at 10:49, Professor Wells saying my suspicion was the intended insight, Theo's polished phrase turning into proof of contamination, my grandmother shouting, "Leave answers answered," or the fountain pen bleeding ink into the floor groove after Mr. Vey's hand finally failed him. It cannot hold the girl who once rubbed out a true sentence because a man with a pen made accuracy feel like ingratitude. It cannot hold the woman I became, because I learned that official documents can lie, but so can blank spaces. If you ever sit in an exam, a meeting, a hearing, a classroom, or any room where your answer names the flaw everyone else politely stepped around, do not erase it just because someone important calls it overreach. Ask yourself whether the evidence holds. If it does, leave it. Let them dislike the word. Let them fear the implication. Let them explain why a wrong seal should be trusted more than your eyes. And if their pen drops when the truth is read aloud, do not mistake the sound for an accident. That is authority losing its grip. Keep your answer.
Keep the date. Keep the seal.
Leave question 14 answered.